In this video, I'll be watching a horror film that I've never seen for every day in October. To mix it up, I'll be watching plenty of great horror films while watching plenty of trash horror films, because I think it'd be really boring for me just to watch only good horror films for this video. I started out the month by watching The Witch by Robert Eggers. I've watched his other films, such as The Lighthouse, which I liked, and The Northman, which I loved. And this film was unsurprisingly great. It has a lot of things that I've come to expect from his filmography, like great music, great cinematography, great acting, dialogue that's unique to the specific time period that his films are set in, which I'm pretty sure The Northman was gonna do that, but the studio didn't allow him to. The child acting was really damn good in the film. The style has continued to inspire a lot of horror films over the last 9 years. Overall, I thought this film was great, and I can't wait for Nosferatu. Then I watched It Comes at Night, and I loved it. The biggest thing that comes to mind when watching this film was how much it reminded me of The Last of Us. Not saying that it took inspiration or ripped it off, but a lot of the movie had the same vibes and atmosphere that The Last of Us had. I didn't know what was going to happen, and I felt a huge sense of paranoia constantly in the film. There's a constant theme of not trusting anything or anybody, and boy does it live up to those themes in the most brutal way possible. The cinematography added a lot of immersion with a lot of long takes and overall great camera work that added to the storytelling. The acting was great all across the board, and by the end of the film, I was on the verge of tears. Then I watched the Nightmare on Elm Street reboot, and it was pretty bad.
That shit is a 2-pack of ass!
This film is pretty sauceless. There's not really any interesting camera work going on in the film. The music is very forgettable. The acting and dialogue is super bland. The movie constantly throws member berries at you. Remember this thing? Remember this thing? Remember this thing? Oh, do you remember this line from this movie?
How's this for a wet dream?
Jackie Earle Haley is doing the best with really shitty material. In this film, the writers go in full in with the idea that Freddy Krueger is a pedophile, and it completely takes away from his character, because most of his dialogue is him saying disgusting shit about minors.
I like young girls.
It doesn't at all come off as goofy and comes off as uncomfortable.
Your mouth says no, but your body says yes.
What the fuck is this?
Haley is also covered in makeup that restricts his face and doesn't allow him to do much with his acting in terms of his facial expressions. The film is littered with tons of cheap jump scares. The only thing that I liked that this film introduced was the idea of micronaps, where if someone goes without sleep for a certain amount of time, your brain shuts off for a few seconds to get a break, and I think the film used it well. It's just that this cool idea was put in a bad nightmare film. Then I watched Summer of '84, and I was very surprised with how good it was. I heard someone say that this film is Stranger Things and Disturbia combined, and that is a pretty accurate description. The child acting was very good in this film, and I appreciate how the kids in this film actually were written to sound like kids and talk like kids, which led to some pretty funny moments throughout the film.
And I caved it, and I dude, it's like, hey mom, I played with my dick today. Nobody cares, it's not a feat. Anyone can do that.
The kids are also given a decent amount of characterization to make them each unique, and it serves the plot well. I found the murder mystery to be very fun and engaging to watch these kids trying to find the killer and come up with interesting plans. The film score was also unique and interesting, with it mostly composing of synth. It reminded me a lot of Good Times soundtrack. I was also completely caught off guard with how ballsy the ending was. Overall, I really enjoyed this film. Then I watched the Wicker Man remake, and I was super disappointed. I was really hoping for a really funny bad movie, but I was mostly bored to tears. There were some funny Nicolas Cage lines.
How did it burn? How did it burn? How did it burn? How did it burn?
What's in the bag? A shark or something?
Oh god. Oh my god. Oh my god.
There's a funny part where he dresses up in a bear suit and punches a lady. But the whole reason why I watched this movie was for the not the bees scene.
Ah, no, not the bees! Not the bees!
And the version that I watched didn't have that scene, so I completely wasted my time with this boring as fuck movie. Then I watched Terrifier, and it was really bad. The whole reason why I even watched this film is to see the practical gore effects, but that's like barely in the film. It's mostly a very uninspired, shitty slasher film with god-awful acting and overall bad dialogue. The characters are also very stupid. The only good thing I can say about this film is that the practical effects looked good, Art the Clown has a really good design, and the actor did a really good job. And the movie was under 90 minutes, so it wasn't too much of a waste of time. Then I watched Sinister, and I thought it was decent. I really liked the overall acting in the film. There's an argument that was in the last 30 minutes of the film that I thought was one of the best scenes in the movie. I found Ethan Hawke's character to be very interesting, and seeing his perspective as he watches these snuff films really made the mystery engaging. I also really liked the ending of the film. The music was very unique, and at times it reminded me of a lot of Atticus Ross and Trent Reznor's work in David Fincher's movies. The cinematography was very clean for the most part. However, this film does have a few issues. The film was padded out with paranormal horror sequences that were full of cliches that get old fast, and felt like something that was studio mandated. There was also a ton of unnecessary jump scares that of course didn't make the film more scary. The film was very terrifying when it focused on the snuff films. Again, it feels like something that the studio mandated. There's also 2 characters in the film that only existed to exposition dump, and it takes away from the mystery and insults the intelligence of the audience. Despite its many flaws, I'd recommend giving it a watch. Then I watched You're Next, and I had a ton of fun with it. I really liked how competent the main character was in the film, which it does explain why she is the way she is, and it leads to her doing a lot of intelligent things in a horror film, which is something you don't really see often in this genre. The kills were really good and pretty brutal at times, the acting was overall good. The film had some moments of dark comedy that I really liked.
I'm the fastest, but I've got this fucking arrow in my back. What does your shoulder have to do with your legs? I'm the fastest.
He has a fucking arrow in his back!
Stop yelling at me, Kelly! You fucking know what it has to do with your legs if you never run, you fat fuck. I'm not fat anymore!
The only issue I had with the film was that some of the decisions that the other characters made were pretty dumb. Some dumb decisions were understandable and some weren't. I liked the soundtrack, but there were some sequences where the music was a bit overbearing and unnecessary. Although the film didn't really do anything new, I had a blast. Then I watched Terrifier 2, and it was a little bit better than Terrifier 1. The only thing that stuck out to me that was 10 times better than the first movie were the kills. There's a kill that happens around the middle of the film that was probably one of the most brutal kills I've seen in the movie. Everything else in the film is pretty much close to being as bad as the first film. Then I watched Ready or Not, and I had a ton of fun. The concept was used very well for the most part, where the main character is playing this deadly game of hide and seek. Not to mention all the other rules established in the game made this film very fun and interesting to watch unfold. The comedy worked really well in the film. Even though the film isn't very subtle about what it's trying to say, it doesn't really bother me because the film doesn't really take itself too seriously. The main issue I had with the film is that a certain character turns evil in the third act, and it doesn't really make any sense considering their actions throughout the story. It feels like the directors just wanted to have a last-minute gotcha moment, but it just ends up making the ending have a lot less of an impact. Then I watched Terrifier 3, and it was easily the best Terrifier film. Not saying that it was necessarily a good film, but it was definitely the most entertaining Terrifier film. The first 2 films bored me to tears, while this one had plenty of carnage throughout the film. It had a $2 million budget, and they used it to the fullest. This film easily had the best kills in the franchise. The main flaws of this film being the writing, of course, and that towards the end of the film it really drags. But overall I enjoyed it, which is something I thought I would have never said about a Terrifier film. Then I watched Raw, and I didn't really like it.
Fucking Raw!
I'm not saying that it's a bad film, I just personally didn't connect with it. There's many aspects that I respect about the film, but overall I just didn't really care about the story or characters. Then I watched The Creature from the Black Lagoon, and I liked it. The only other Universal monster film I've seen outside of this film was The Invisible Man, which I thought was great. It's interesting to go back and watch these old monster films and see how the filmmakers were able to create something so cool with very little, compared to the vast amount of tech we have now, like CGI. The movie is aged very well for the most part, with amazing underwater scenes. The design for the creature is iconic. Rico Browning, the guy who did the underwater sequences as the creature, had to hold his breath for minutes at a time for those specific scenes, which is just crazy to me. The cheesy and corny aspects of the film were very charming and added a lot to the tone of the film. Then I watched Carnival of Souls, and I thought it was great. I can see a lot of this film's influence not only on the films that came after it, but in today's filmmaking. It reminded me a ton of Jacob's Ladder. The film is shot beautifully, the music is super eerie and makes the film 10 times more unnerving. There are many sequences involving the main character's visions that were super surreal and terrifying at times. Overall, this was a very interesting watch. Then I watched Diabolique, and I thought it was great. Fun fact, Alfred Hitchcock tried to get the rights to the book that the film was based on, but the director of Diabolique beat him to it. It took a bit for me to get into the film, but once it gets going, it gets going. And the ending is just mind-blowing. And at the end of the film, it tells you not to spoil the ending, which is very unique. Then I watched Jaws. Yup, I've never seen it up until now. You can take my movie card away if you wanna. What else can I possibly say about Jaws that hasn't already been stated before? It's incredible. Then I watched Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, and
Oh my god. Get him the fuck out of here! Get him the, please! Black, get him the fuck out of here! Black, please! Get him the fuck out of here, bro! Y'all niggas think I'm stupid or something? Get the fuck out of here. These niggas is trying me, bro.
Then I watched Halloween Resurrection, and it was, of course, bad. But I did get some enjoyment out of it, mainly due to Busta Rhymes, for better or for worse.
Let's see what you got. Michael Myers is a killer shark. Baggy ass overalls.
I like how it took the franchise into a different direction, even if the execution was trash. Hell, the entire film is just complete slop. Then I watched Martyrs, and wow. Yeah, this movie's pretty fucked. But it wasn't just shock value like the Saw sequels or Host told. The violence and gore had substance for the most part. The story was very engaging and unpredictable, and overall, it just took huge leaps. I really liked the soundtrack. It reminded me a ton of 28 Days Later. I really liked how ambiguous the ending was. The only issue I had with the film is that the third act kind of just got really repetitive to the point where the violence kind of just got a bit gratuitous. But overall, I thought it was a solid movie, but I'm probably not going to rewatch it anytime soon. Then I watched Dog Soldiers, and it was a lot of fun. I really liked all the characters in the film. They all had great banter between each other. Also, the actor who plays the main character did the voice acting for Soap McTavish in the Modern Warfare trilogy. So all I heard throughout the entire film was Soap McTavish's awesome voice.
That's werewolves to you and me.
It reminded me a ton of Predator, where these macho soldiers get humbled by a monster, or in this case, a pack of werewolves. It also reminded me of Sam Raimi's films. The style of the film is very much like an 80s action film, even down to the film grain. The action is fun. The only issue I had with the film was the editing. It would sometimes get really quick cutty and spazzy for no reason. It would make it really hard to understand what's going on at times. Overall, though, this movie's really badass.
We've got a badass over here.
Then I watched It Follows, and it was pretty good. The soundtrack was great and had a huge emphasis on synth. The cinematography was fantastic and allowed for the viewer to catch details in the background of certain shots in a very satisfying manner. I really liked the 80s tributes, even if it did get a bit heavy-handed at times. The overall story and how this creature is introduced and how the rules work is interesting. Overall, I had a good time. Then I watched Mother, and this is probably one of the most surreal and bonkers movies I've seen in quite some time. It reminded me of plenty of Charlie Kaufman films and Beau's Afraid. One thing that stuck out to me, though, is how fucking stressful it is. Sometimes it's very stressful, and other times it's very subtle with its stress. The editing and sound play a huge part in creating this stress. Jennifer Lawrence gives a great performance. She's the only normal person in this film, so how she reacts to the crazy events is how we, the audience, would react in that situation. Every other character in this film is very weird and off-putting. Hell, the entire film is just really weird and off-putting and keeps you on edge. Then I watched The Wolf of Snow Hollow, and it was good. Although it does have comedic elements, I found it more in the realm of something like The Bear, where it's comedic but mainly dramatic. The film reminded me a lot of Coen Brother films, mainly Fargo. I found the story and mystery to be overall good. The only issue I had is that I didn't like some of the music choices in the film, but overall it was a solid watch. Then I watched Fright Night, and I enjoyed it. I really liked the main villain. He was very charming and intimidating. The effects were incredible. The music is very good, but the main theme is a bit overused throughout the film. The only glaring issue I had is that the main character is trying to convince people that his neighbor is a vampire, but decides not to describe at all what happened that led to him believing that he's a vampire. And when he does try explaining, it's a really shitty explanation. There's also some scenes that just go on for way too long, but overall I enjoyed it. Then I watched Night of the Living Dead, and it was a very interesting watch, because this is the roots of the zombie genre. This is where it all started.
However, stay with me here. Zombies.
And without this film, my life would probably be very different, because there would have been no Call of Duty Zombies, no Left 4 Dead, no Resident Evil, etc, etc. Back to the film, I was very surprised with how ballsy some of the directions the story took, and especially that ending. Although a lot of the film is very jank, it's hard to really use that criticism because of when it came out and that it pioneered the zombie genre. Then I watched Bone Tomahawk, and it was phenomenal. I've seen this director's other two films, such as Dragged Across Concrete and Brawl in Cell Block 99, which are super underrated and incredible. And this film was no different in terms of quality. This film was just as brutal as his other films. I loved how the story took some very subversive angles. The movie was very well shot and had a lot of great dialogue. I also really liked how 95% of the movie had zero music, which really worked with the style of the film. This is easily one of the best movies I've seen this month. Then I watched Totally Killer, and I enjoyed it. The best way I can describe this film is if Back to the Future was a slasher film. There's some fish out of water humor when the main character goes back in time to the 80s and seeing her politically correct views clash with how non-politically correct most people were in the 80s. The story is very fun, even if it does probably not make sense at times considering it's a time travel movie. I was along for the ride, I bought it. Although none of the kills were particularly creative, it was nice to see plenty of blood in these kills. The glaring issue I had with this film though is that the style just reeks of a TV movie. Like, the cinematography is passable, the music's very generic and cliche at times, but there's just no sauce in this movie. It's sauceless. Also, the villain reveal was very underwhelming, but overall though, I enjoyed it. Then I watched The Predator and it was awful. I avoided this film like the plague ever since it came out, and for good reason. I like the main crew of Marines, although none of them are particularly well written. I just like the actors. The Alan Silvestri score returns for the 100th time. There are some fun kills, and I think that's where my positives end. The story is just complete nonsense. The dialogue is shit. The jokes are super drawn out and cringeworthy. They made autism into a superpower in this film where you can somehow communicate and understand alien technology if you have any autism. Or maybe it's just this particular character, but it's still stupid. The CGI for the Predator dogs, yes, Predator dogs, in the upgrade Predator was really bad for the most part. The making of this film was a complete shit show, mainly because of Shane Black and the studio. Overall, I understand why this is the worst Predator film. Then I watched the 1978 Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and it was great. The cinematography felt very documentary-esque with great uses of handheld shots. It slowly builds the tension of the invasion happening throughout the film, and because the enemy of the film looks like any ordinary person, it's hard to tell whether someone's been snatched or not. And man, that ending is iconic. Then I watched Little Monsters. The only reason why I watched this is because one of my friends brought it up in a conversation about weird movies that we watched as a kid, and he told me it was good. But I almost turned it off after seeing the main character make such an atrocity. A peanut butter and onion sandwich! What the fuck? And then his parents get mad at him for sneaking a PB and onion sandwich, and honestly, I agree! This kid is throwing up tons of red flags. I'm getting off topic. There were a ton of things in this movie that Monsters Inc. had, like having the whole separate world that's for monsters, and in that world, there is entrances to kids' bedrooms. And then they go to these kids' bedrooms and go throughout their house and terrorize them. Hey, I'm not accusing Monsters Inc. of ripping off this film, but it's teetering on that. One thing that also surprised me is that for a PG film, there was a ton of swearing. Overall, this film just fits the bill of weird, obscure movies that you watched as a kid that got forgotten in time. Very bizarre movie. Then I watched The Lost Boys, and it was decent. I thought the story was pretty fun with Kiefer Sutherland being a huge standout in the movie. I liked how it changed common things in vampire stories to keep it interesting. The movie really wears the 80s on its sleeves with its soundtrack. If there's any issue I could have with this film is that the plot armor is a bit strong at times. Like, there's some parts where the main characters probably should have been dead because these vampires have super strength, but it didn't bother me that much. It was a fun 80s classic. Then the final movie I watched was Eraserhead, and this was crazy.
Bananas.
This film kind of starts out a little bit normal, but then just keeps getting weird, super surreal, and dreamlike. I feel like I was watching a nightmare unfold. There were so many times when I was watching this and I was like, what the fuck? What the fuck am I watching? Because the film goes in so many weird and random directions. I'm sure all this mindfuckery serves a thematic purpose, but I'm too lazy to look it up. Sorry for the super late upload. This video should have been uploaded like 15 days ago, but I got lazy. I also work on videos on my main gaming channel. If you're interested in gaming slop content, I left a link to my channel in my bio. Anyway.
The fuck?
Yeah, man, you're on tour today.
License and registration.